So, who was S.R. Crockett? Well, once an international bestseller, today Scots author Samuel Rutherford Crockett has been largely forgotten. You've probably never heard of him, and you're not alone. In this video, I'm going to give you the briefest of introductions and explain why I think he's worthy of the massive task of building a museum to him. Quite apart from being, in my opinion, a jolly good read, I believe Crockett is an ideal case study for Scottish cultural and literary history. He's famous enough to leave behind lots of documentation, but obscure enough today that many have never heard of him. So his life provides an excellent example of how fact and fiction blur, even in the lives of well-known people. And in my opinion, he's central to one of the biggest cultural misrepresentations in Scottish literary history. I know that's a big claim, and of course I can't prove it in this short video, but the museum will, hopefully, open doors allowing you to explore and examine this claim for yourself. In a nutshell, my argument is that for too long the period in Scottish literature between 1890s and 1914 has been seen as a cultural and literary dark age, but I think this period is far less dark than we've been taught to believe. In this regard, Crockett works brilliantly as a case study for understanding how and why authors become marginalised and forgotten. His life and literature offer insights not just into Victorian and Edwardian Scotland, but into the literary and cultural practices of the 20th and early 21st centuries that determine who gets remembered and who gets erased. As long as information about Crockett is presented from culturally biased perspectives, and contrary evidence remains hidden in archives and behind paywalls, there's no opportunity to re-evaluate his contribution. Beyond one man and his writing, digital preservation of the archive democratises who gets to write Scottish literary history, and an archive preserved is a narrative challenged. So, what do we know about Crockett? Well, we know he was born on September the 24th, 1859, at Little Duchry, in the parish of Balmagee. He was raised by his unmarried mother and maternal grandparents. The family moved to Castle Douglas in 1867, and in 1876 he won the Galloway bursary to study at Edinburgh University. While there, he started journalistic writing to help support himself. As a young man, from the mid-1870s till the mid-1880s, he spent long periods travelling abroad as a tutor, before returning to marry and settle into the respectable life of a minister in 1887. However, he kept writing for magazines and left the ministry behind at the earliest opportunity in 1895, when he became firmly established as a professional author. Like many writers, Crockett's overnight fame came as the result of a decade or more of hard work. Following the first publication of a collection of short stories in 1893, he quickly became a best-selling author. The Victorian cult of celebrity meant that every aspect of his life was written about, and his works were widely reviewed in the press. And just like a celebrity today, what was written about him was a product of marketing and varying accuracy. He had many artistic connections, and we do know that he was painted by Whistler and caricatured by Vanity Fair. His fame opened many doors for him, and the literary context he existed in meant that he mixed with many figures we do still know well, and was part of a significant moment in publishing and cultural history. Crockett had a variety of chronic health issues, but as a professional writer who was contracted up to 3 years ahead of publication, it was deemed prudent to keep quiet about these. He never lost the love of travel, and spent much of the last decade of his life abroad, both for health and undertaking research for his European works. His last letters date from 1913, and he died in April 1914 in France, from where his body was repatriated to Balmagee. So let's turn to the question of building a museum. Well, I first encountered Crockett in 1995. And after nearly 20 years of personal study and research, in 2014 I founded the Galloway Raiders, a group dedicated to rehabilitating Crockett's reputation. The intention was to publish new editions of his works, making him accessible to a modern audience. Between 2014 and 2016, I inherited the two major research archives from the late 20th century's foremost and perhaps only real Crockett scholars, Dr. Isla Murray Donaldson and Richard D. Jackson. Their joint archive came in the form of over 30 boxes, but from the start it presented a range of challenges. The content of letters, contracts, photographs and articles, mixed with research notes, offered a rich but chaotic repository. It was unwanted by any national collection, but for me it represents a vital insight into Scotland's social, literary and cultural history. Archival work is non-linear, with discoveries leading to tangents, and interpretive possibilities are almost limitless. So, for nearly 10 years I've been grappling with, and getting distracted by, the resources in their physical form. But after a decade running the Galloway Raiders, and recognising my own advancing years, I've come to the conclusion that the creation of a digital space is vital to preserve the legacy. Social history is rarely straightforward. Historians all too often dismiss fiction as a research resource, but Crockett's life illustrates the complexities of historical truth. You might think that researching someone's biography is simply a matter of consulting official records. But with Crockett, the official records themselves are contradictory, and that's where things get interesting. His birth certificate lists him as illegitimate, but his marriage certificate lists a father's name that has to be at least partly invented. His death certificate is in French and does not list the cause of death. Even his memorial stone has his birth year wrong. His name isn't even stable. Sometimes it's Crockett with a double T, sometimes Crockett with a single T. And there's also the addition of the middle name, Rutherford. Now, these aren't just clerical errors. They tell us something important about Victorian society, about the stigma of illegitimacy, about respectability, about how social pressure shaped what got written down. So, when official records fail us or contradict each other, where do we turn for evidence about how people actually lived? And this is where Crockett's fiction becomes invaluable. Along with his personal and professional letters, they preserve what official records cannot capture. Many of his Galloway works, for example, were written whilst those communities were still living and breathing. He is documenting rural landscapes from direct experience, recording local customs and speech patterns as they were. He puts real people and real places into his stories, sometimes very thinly disguised. So yes, much of his writing is fictionalized, but it's fiction built on memory and observation, which makes it useful social history evidence when official records are silent or unreliable. A key aspect of our digital museum is to help explore the many connections between fact and fiction, not just in Crockett's writing, but in the broader context of the times he lived in. Crockett often wrote himself into his stories, not unusual for an author. We can follow his ordinary boy heroes and his various narrators and glean some information about his life and opinions. Where solid historical evidence fails us or offers inconsistency and contradiction, we can look at these aspects to find insight into his inner life. We do, however, need to strike a balance between interpretation and speculation, but nevertheless it's a fascinating exploration. From his work, we can see his championing of the ordinary rural working class, his opposition to hierarchical power, and his often unique take on Scotland, which presented a challenge to the establishment even as he was publishing popular works in a mainstream environment. The creation of our museum is intended to open up as much of the evidenced information about Crockett to support his fictional writings as is possible, so that interested readers and future scholars can reassess, reinterpret and rediscover more about his life and times and his impact on the literary and cultural life of Scotland in the under-researched period between the death of Stevenson and the rise of John Buchan. The museum provides several ways to engage with Crockett's legacy. You can browse curated exhibitions, search the database for specific topics or people, read his complete works, or explore critical essays that reinterpret his contribution to Scottish literature. Everything is designed to be accessible, searchable, and open to new interpretations. This is just an overview. I'll be offering separate presentations on each of these features before the museum opens. The museum does not attempt to offer a definitive view. Instead, we embrace uncertainty, we use multiple sources, and value narrative as much as data. Our goal is to open your eyes, firstly to the fact that Crockett existed, and more broadly to the significance of his disappearance in the creation of Scotland's literary cultural landscape. Through rigorous and open presentation of fact and fiction, we hope to contribute to future scholarship in a positive way. This approach has implications beyond Crockett. It offers a model for how we might recover other marginalised voices from this supposedly dark period of Scottish literature.